We all make mistakes from time to time. Why, just the other day, I accidentally ordered Kaluga caviar instead of Beluga caviar. I mean, can you even believe that? If I had had a dinner party, that would have really been a disaster. And though that mistake was a bit of a costly one, it can't even put a candle to some of the mistakes that have been made in history. When it comes down to it, people are inherently flawed. And people are also the ones in charge of large, dangerous machinery, radioactive materials, and testing technological advancements. Today, we're going to take a look at the most expensive mistakes in human history. We'll analyze what oversight happened for the disasters to occur, why they cost so much, and what other impacts the mistakes had on society. Number 4. Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster. The first most expensive mistake on our list was kickstarted by one of the worst disasters in history. In 2011, on March 11th, a magnitude 9.1 undersea megathrust earthquake struck off the coast of Japan. The sheer power of this earthquake moved Honshu, the main island of Japan, 8 feet to the east. A tsunami was triggered with the waves that reached heights of 133 feet. The tsunami swept across the coast of Japan, killing over 15,000 people. However, it's a building that the tsunami hit that resulted in one of the most expensive, avoidable disasters in history: the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. When the tsunami swept through the nuclear power plant on the coast of Japan, all hell broke loose. As a safety procedure, the active reactors automatically shut down upon detecting the earthquake. Because of several grid problems, the electricity supply failed, which caused the emergency diesel generators to start. The ocean water hopped over the protective sea wall, flooding the plant and knocking out the emergency generators. This led to not one, but 3 nuclear meltdowns, 3 hydrogen explosions, and an extreme release of radioactive materials. In other words, it was bad, really bad. That all being said, from an outside perspective, an earthquake and tsunami isn't exactly a mistake. But upon investigation after the disaster, it became clear that mistakes allowed the resulting nuclear disaster to happen on such a massive scale. Tokyo Electric Power Company, or TEPCO, failed to meet basic safety requirements in their plant. TEPCO admitted in 2012 that they had failed to take necessary measures to make the plant more safe because they worried about making the public fear nuclear power, which is a bit ironic. A report in 2000 found that the plant was at high risk, but TEPCO didn't report their findings because announcing that information would just create anxiety. Kind of like nuclear disasters do, I suppose. Another study in 2008 found that the facility needed immediate changes to protect the facility from flooding and seawater. The study mentioned the possibility and assessed the risk of a 33-foot tall wave during a tsunami. TEPCO said that risk was unrealistic and decided not to put any preventative changes into effect. And if you want to go even further back, the plant was originally going to be built 98 feet above sea level, but was brought down to a mere 33 feet in order to make it easier to bring equipment in. And if you want to go further back than that, the International Atomic Energy Agency expressed concerns about putting any nuclear power plants in Japan in the first place due to its location in such an active seismic zone. As a result of the accident, 154,000 residents were evacuated. Radioactive water contaminated the Pacific Ocean and the air, having a strong impact around the world. Traces of cesium-134, the radioactive material from the plant, have been found in wine made from vineyards in Napa Valley, California. And the cleanup of this disaster isn't easy. It's expected to take 30 to 40 years. The cleanup and lawsuits that have already happened as a result of the nuclear disaster total $12 billion, making the multiple mistakes that TEPCO made some of the most expensive mistakes in history. In one of the lawsuits alone, 137 people were each awarded $345,000. Number 3. Columbia Shuttle Disaster. When you crash and wreck a car, you know that's an expensive mistake. But what about wrecking a space shuttle? Well, in the case of the Space Shuttle Columbia, that mistake will cost you $13 billion. On February 1st, 2003, the Columbia Space Shuttle started its re-entry into the atmosphere on its 28th mission into space. Unfortunately, a piece of foam insulation broke off from the external tank of the space shuttle, striking the left wing of the orbiter. Because the ship was re-entering the atmosphere, the damage allowed the atmospheric gases to destroy the internal wing structure, which made the spaceship fall apart. And while that may sound like a freak disaster and mistake, it was anything but. There was a similar problem with foam breaking off in previous launches. In fact, when Columbia took off 16 days before the fatal disaster, a similar issue with foam took place. However, nothing was done to solve the problem, and NASA limited the investigation, saying there was nothing they could do about the foam. The accident resulted in the death of 7 astronauts: Rick D. Husband, William C. McCool, Michael P. Anderson, Ilan Ramon, Kalpana Chawla, David M. Brown, and Laurel Blair Salton Clark. After the disaster happened, NASA stopped all flight operations and began an intensive investigation. Construction that was taking place on the International Space Station was stalled, leaving Russia to supply the crew there with its resupply. The initial investigation lasted 29 months, where dozens of expert military and civilian analysts got to work creating models to see if the accident was preventable, which I assume you've already gathered it was. Debris had to be recovered from over 2,000 different fields, lakes, and ponds in Texas, Arkansas, and Louisiana. The conclusion that the disaster was completely preventable was met with a lot of anger from the public, and was a huge factor in the entire NASA space fleet being retired back in 2011. Many people have concluded that so-called go fever, where NASA put meeting expected launch times before safety, is one of the reasons NASA pushed forward with the ship's re-entry. Number 2. Deepwater Horizon oil spill. The most recent mistake on our list, the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, is also runner-up for the costliest mistake, costing $61 billion. That's 61 billion. The Deepwater Horizon was a 10-year-old submersible, mobile, floating drilling rig that was stationed in the Gulf of Mexico, roughly 41 miles off the coast of Louisiana. On April 20th, 2010, the Deepwater Horizon was hard at work, digging a well at the bottom of the ocean. However, their work would be cut short by a fiery blast. A bubble of methane escaped from the well and shot up the drill column, igniting under high pressure and causing a massive explosion. 94 crew members were rescued following ignition, while 11 crew members were not recovered and are presumed to have died during the explosion. This explosion resulted in 4.9 billion barrels worth of oil polluting the ocean. For a better picture, that is 210 million gallons, which is enough to fill 420 Olympic-sized swimming pools. This oil flowed over the course of 87 days, while multiple attempts were made to stop the leak. In the days following the disaster, remotely operated underwater vehicles were sent to cap the well, but every attempt made was unsuccessful in doing so. Like I've said, mistakes do happen, and sometimes they're unpreventable, but this mistake wasn't one of those. The rig operator, Transocean, and BP, who was in charge of the operation, were blamed for the disaster, and there are many reasons why. Transocean in general had several safety problems leading up to the BP oil spill. Though they owned 42% of oil rigs, they were known for 73% of rig incidents. They had over 18 pollution citations. Leading up to the spill, engineers had concern, but they were told they would be fired if they raised any safety concerns or filed any reports. The blowout preventer on the rig was last checked in 2005, 5 years before the disaster took place. On top of that, Transocean had previously made modifications to the blowout preventer on their rigs that actually increased the risk of failure in spite of warnings. All in all, a huge study concluded that BP made 8 risky and unnecessary mistakes that directly resulted in the disaster. Their settlement and the cost for cleanup, environmental and economic damages resulted in a loss of $61.7 billion, the destruction of the environment, and the tragic loss of 11 lives. Number 1. The Chernobyl disaster. Now, we've made it to the most expensive mistake in human history, and it is the darkest, saddest, and most deadly mistake on this list. The Chernobyl disaster was the most costly mistake in human history, costing a staggering $590 billion. On April 26, 1986, the Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, was testing its nuclear power reactors to simulate an electrical power outage, aimed at aiding the development for safety procedures. This test ended up doing about the polar opposite of that, although several tests had been run in the years prior to the disaster. During the test, the power unexpectedly dropped to an incredibly low level. The operators, who were inexperienced, weren't able to fully restore power in the reactor, but they didn't understand that moving forward with the test anyway would be a severe risk. As they pressed forward with the test, the operators triggered a reactor shutdown. But the unstable conditions and flaws within the reactor itself caused a nuclear chain reaction to take place. The reactor core was ruptured by a catastrophic steam explosion. A fire began, causing workers to flee. Firemen from the surrounding town of Pripyat rushed the scene, unaware that for many of them, that fire would lead to their demise. In the hours following the disaster, radiation spread wildly through the surrounding area and into Europe. Pripyat was not evacuated until 39 hours after the initial incident, in which time several residents fell violently ill from radiation poisoning. The world wouldn't be warned about Chernobyl until alarms at a nuclear power plant all the way in Sweden went off in April 28th, forcing the Soviet Union to eventually disclose what happened. By the end of the disaster, 2 people had died in the initial explosion, and 134 firemen and staff were hospitalized, 28 of whom would perish in the weeks following the disaster from radiation. The estimated range of people who died as a result of Chernobyl's radiation spans from 4,000 to 16,000 people. In the investigation following the disaster, it was concluded that the disaster was preventable and happened as a result of untrained staff and a flawed reactor, which was made worse by the operator's removal of several control and safety rods inside the reactor. On top of that, multiple safety systems were switched off in the already dangerous RMBK reactor, which was a recipe for disaster. Following Chernobyl, many RMBK reactors were shut down, and any remaining were refitted to address the flaws and safety concerns. Cleaning up Chernobyl is a process that is still happening to this day and has had a massive impact on the environment in not just Ukraine, but all of Europe. So, there you have it, the 4 most expensive mistakes in human history. My apologies that this video isn't a bit on the lighter side, but I want to give you guys the facts and the truth, always. If you enjoy these kind of videos, let me know in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. And as always, I'm Mr. Luxury. Pip pip, the doodly doo.